last time we spoke about the prayers and some differences between the Sephardic and the Ashkenazi practices. I want to speak a little bit more about tefillah in general, and then about the synagogue and the Torah reading. Some of the differences, some of the main differences that one will encounter. When you enter a Sephardic synagogue versus a classic Ashkenazi synagogue. So we spoke about the korbanot, the section that leads to the Pesukei de Zimra. Then, when you start Pesukei de Zimra, Hodul Adonai Kitov, etc., there will be a lot of sections that are sung by the congregation. In the Ashkenazi tradition, usually during the week you don't have, and also the Sephardic, during the week there's no chanting, but the Sephardim read the whole tefillah beginning to end. The cantor reads everything out loud, and the Ashkenazim don't. And on Shabbat, in the Sephardic tradition, depends on which synagogue. I'm not going to say that they're all the same, but there are two main traditions within the Sephardic world besides the Spanish. Spanish Portuguese is famous, but besides that, you have the division is usually the Middle East, which is called in Arabic, it's called Al-Sharq, which means the East, and North Africa, which is called in Arabic Al-Maghrib, the West. So within the Arabic-speaking world, the Muslim world, you have East and West. East is the Middle East, which includes Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Egypt, and the Maghrib, the North Africa, which includes Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, and Morocco. And you notice I didn't include Iran. Iran is not part of it because even though it was under Muslim culture, in terms of religion, the culture is different. It's the Persians are not Arabs, and they're very proud of their that's like Indo-Aryan tradition. It's a different culture altogether. And then you go further from Iran into the what is Central Asia, Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan. You have other communities that are they have a blend of the Iraqi tradition, the Iranian tradition, Bukhara, the people who migrated basically originally from Iraq, but blended into the Central Asian tradition. Then an interesting history, by the way, there, because Iraqi merchants started traveling from Iraq all the way to China already in the 6th, 7th century. They were called Radani, and the Radanis were travelers who would go from Iraq through they would go through Yemen and India and to China, and then would go back and go to Europe. And the way they are described, they were people who spoke an average of 7 languages, very well learned and familiar with all different cultures. But when we go to the Sephardic world, as I said, there we have the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal, that later on, after the expulsion, spread all over the world. You have the Sharq and the Maghrib, the Central Asian, Iran and the other what became later on the republics in the Soviet Union. There's another community that used to have a more distinct culture, but it was somewhat not erased, but assimilated with the exiles from Spain. And this is the community of the Balkans that used to be called Romaniotim. They were Greek speaking Jews before the Ladino speakers came, and then you have also the Yemenite Jews as a community by itself. But what I'm talking now in terms of generally of the Sephardic traditions, I'm speaking about the Middle East and the Maghrib, and some things apply to to Spain and Portugal as well. If you want to know what all the differences of prayers and practice and ritual, there is a book called Keter Shem Tov. Keter Shem Tov, that was written by Rabbi Shem Tov Gagin. Shem Tov Gagin, and he was a rabbi in London in the 1900s, and in 7 volumes he documented all the differences between the different communities within the Sephardic world. So I'll show you 1 second. The name. 1 second. So what you will see in a Sephardic synagogue, like I said, the shark or the shark in the Maghrib, is that on Shabbat there are certain sections that are sung in the synagogue, and that is in the middle of Pesukei de Zimra. There's a section where we say Hashem Melech, Hashem Malach, Hashem Yimloch L'Olam Va'ed, and that is usually sung by the cantor, and the community repeats. And there are some congregations would have the same tune every Shabbat. In others, it is the role of the cantor to introduce new melodies, and that is something that I'll speak about when we speak about the cantorial tradition among the Sephardim in general. So, for example, you could go into the synagogue and hear them singing Adonai Melech, Adonai Malach, Adonai Meloch Le'olam Va'ed, which is a tune that is taken from the holiday prayers of Sukkot. And then in other occasions they will do a Turkish tune, which would be Adonai Melech, Adonai Malach, Adonai Meloch Le'olam Va'ed. Or they would do Atikva for the same words. Adonai Melech, Adonai Malach, Adonai Yimloch Le'olam Va'ed. And the cantor is expected to be creative and to introduce new melodies into the prayer, especially in the Syrian tradition, which later on was imported to Yerushalayim in the 1900s and then spread all over the Sephardic world. This is a system where the cantor sings certain parts of the prayer on Shabbat, like this part, Hallelujah, Hallelujah Bekocho, El Adon Al Kol HaMa'asim, and other parts. And he could either choose melodies that everybody knows, but he also has the liberty to introduce new tunes, whatever he feels like. When you have to be careful not to alienate the people, it has to be something that people could connect to. But it could be a Broadway musical, it could be a classical piece, Arabic music. There we have the flexibility. For example, this past Shemini Atzeret, when we were doing Tikkun HaGeshem, I used the tune of for Nishmat Kol Hai. I used the tune of Singing in the Rain, and for the Kedusha, the tune of Listen to the Falling Rain. Jose Feliciano, listen to the falling rain, yes, listen to it falls. So I did in Kedusha, Nagrishach Venaharitzach. So this is considered part of the culture. It's interesting because on one hand it's very modern. You're allowed to incorporate into the prayer new tunes. On the other hand, it's an ancient tradition of doing so. To the extent that there is a discussion among Sephardic and Ashkenazi rabbis. There's debate whether you're allowed to appropriate non-Jewish music and incorporate it into the tefillah. And there is an interesting divide between the Sephardic and the Ashkenazi world, which probably has to do with the fact that in the Ashkenazi world, the non-Jewish culture was associated directly with paganism. There was a very strong sense of paganism, of idolatry, especially for those who lived in Catholic countries. So, in that debate, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, who was the chief rabbi of Israel, says that you can take any any tune, any melody, any type of music, and incorporate it into the prayer, because he says, "Mangina ena mekabelet tum'ah." Music cannot become impure. He says, of course, if it's a contemporary song that is associated with certain ideas or pictures that are inappropriate, don't use it. But after a while, it is forgotten. I just had a class with the Sunday school yesterday, and we were talking about the idea of heaven and hell, punishment and reward, and I quoted John Lennon's "Imagine" as a source, and they looked at me in blank stare, like, imagine. Like, I couldn't believe that kids who were born, they were born 2000, but that have no idea what "Imagine" is, right? So, in that sense, if there is a song that maybe 20 or 30 years ago was maybe considered inappropriate, but the tune is nice, now you could use it in prayer. Now, in the Ashkenazi world, there was a divide. The Hasidic world was okay with that. The Hasidic world believed in, because part of the agenda of the Hasidic world was to bring everybody together and not to alienate certain sections of the people, certain classes. They said, we accept every music, makes you happy. Take the music of the Cossacks, take the music of the non-Jews, and appropriate it and use it for your needs, and it's beautiful. But the non-Hasidic world, what they call the Litvak or the Mitnagdim, did not accept that, and they're very strict on not introducing foreign tunes into the prayer. But in recent years, they let it creep into the popular music. So popular Hasidic music is either borrowing directly tunes from non-Jewish music, or composes music very much alike whatever is hip at the time. They will try to imitate it, not creating always original music, but imitating the common, whatever is trendy at the time. So, for example, you could hear a song like this: "Modani, modani lefanecha, melechai, melechai vekayam." You know the song, right? I can't live if living is without you. Or they will sing Nashma Israel to the tune of "I Will Survive." אני מאמין באמונה שלמה בביאת המשיח, אני מאמין ואף על פי שיתמהמה עם כל זה הקלו בכל יום שיבוא אני מאמין. Very nice, right? But it's a question of where do you draw the line. So for them, for the non-Hasidic world, drawing the line is between prayer and sort of like religious entertainment that is allowed somewhere outside the synagogue. For in the Hasidic world, it's okay, and they are in line with the Sephardic world on that says music cannot become impure. You could import any music into the synagogue. And in the last 100 years, especially in the last 100 years, there was a very, very broad cross-fertilization where we borrow mainly from the Arab world. Several great composers in the Egyptian scene, Muhammad Abdul Wahab and others, that their music is still used in the synagogues today. And when I go back to the debate between Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, who is in favor of using the prayers in the music in the synagogue, he quotes a testimony of one of the rabbis of Izmir. His name was Rabbi Eliyahu HaKohen of Smyrna, who used to go to the church on the holidays, because that was when new tunes were introduced in the church. And this Rabbi Eliyahu Kohen of Smyrna used to go to the church on Yom Kippur, on the holidays, and sit. He said he calls it me'achorei pargod, behind the curtain, to pick up some new tunes to use in the synagogue. So even that was not considered a problem. And that is done in our prayer. It's done in different places. They're already set up. You know that the Hallelujah is going to be sung, the Kaddish is going to be sung, etc. Now, when we get to the I'll talk later on about the setup of the synagogue, but when we get to Kriyat Torah, the reading of the Torah. Also, first of all, maybe it is related. The Hazan in the traditional Sephardic synagogues, and now I know in many Ashkenazi synagogues in America as well. In the traditional Sephardic synagogues, the Hazan always stood in the center of the synagogue, and the Torah was also read in the center. Whereas in most Ashkenazi synagogues, the Hazan used to stand all the way at the front by the Echal, and only the Torah was read from the center. That was so crucial, was considered so essential to the Ashkenazi synagogues, that when in Europe, the cultural walls between Jews and non-Jews came down, and people asked the Hatam Sofer, Rabbi Moshe Sofer of Pressburg, the Hatam Sofer, they asked him if they are allowed to move the teva from not the teva, the podium of the Hazan, of the cantor, from the front of the synagogue to the center. He said, no, this is like heresy. This is, you're following the paths of the non-Jews. You cannot do that. And the reason for having the teva in the middle is, it makes sense that the cantor will be in the middle so everybody could focus on him. In the Ashkenazi synagogues, it's probably an influence of the structure of the churches, where you have narrow pews. Each one sees the back of the person who sits in front of him, like row behind row, and the person who leads the services is in the front. In the Sephardic world, there was no such model to imitate, because in a mosque the imam would deliver a sermon, but prayers would be conducted in a more equal basis. Everybody just bows down together and prays together. So, and that is another reason we do have to talk about the setup now. That the setting of the seats in a classic Sephardic synagogue would always be sort of U-shaped. There are chairs along the walls facing the center, and maybe one more row in the back also facing the center. In this way, all the congregants can see the cantor, but also they can see each other. There are three groups of people who could see each other, so there's a sense of unity in the room, whereas in the Ashkenazi communities, each congregant sees the back of the person who's ahead of him, and then again, it's an influence of the church, especially the Gothic churches in early medieval Germany. In the Sephardic synagogues, there were two ways to put the teva, either at floor level or a little elevated from the floor, or literally a tower. It was called a migdal. They believe the cantor has to project to the whole community, so you could still visit some of the synagogues in Tzefat, the Abu Hav synagogue and Al-Sheikh synagogue, and you will see that in the middle of the synagogue there's like this wooden tower that the Hazan had to scale to go up. Probably also would make the Hazan very focused, because he would be afraid to lose his balance and fall of this place, even though it was fenced off. But it gave people sort of a focus into the teva. Whereas in Ashkenazi synagogues, there were places where it was the opposite, based on the pasuk, on the verse, "I called you out from the depths." Mima'amakim kraticha Adonai. The teva, or the place of the Hazan, would be lower than the rest of the synagogue. You have to actually go down one or two steps. So once the Amidah is over, and we have the Hazara, the repetition of the Amidah. There were many Sephardic communities that canceled the repetition of the Amidah because of arguments of the Rambam and later on rabbis in Morocco, who said that the repetition is for people who cannot read the tefillah. But now that we have sidurim and everybody could pray, there's no point in repeating the Amidah. They also said that during the repetition, people talk, they move around, they're distracted, so they canceled it. But it has been revived in the Sephardic world because of the Kabbalah. Because the Kabbalah, the Kabbalists said that there's a great value to the repetition of the Amidah. Another difference, so in today's world, it seems like Sephardim will be more reluctant to do a what is called B'Kol Ram, starting the Amidah out loud, instead of doing Amidah with repetition. Another interesting difference in the Amidah is that of Birkat Kohanim. In the traditional Sephardic communities, Birkat Kohanim is done whenever there are Kohanim in the Bet Knesset, in the synagogue, whereas in the Ashkenazi communities, traditionally, outside Israel, the Kohanim would only do Birkat Kohanim during the holidays, during Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, and Rosh Hashanah. And the reason is very interesting. The commentaries on Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi Moshe Isserlis says that the reason the Kohanim do not do Birkat Kohanim on a weekday or on Shabbat and only on the holidays is that one has to give the blessing when he is in a good mood of joy and happiness and tranquility. And he says during the week you don't have that. You're always working, you're always busy. And on Shabbat also, people are unhappy because they're worried about their business. This is the Rama is writing in Poland in the 16th century, and he says that the people are observing Shabbat are not happy because they feel that they are losing money by not opening their businesses on Shabbat. So they don't have the required joy to impart the blessing. Whereas on the holidays, when there is additional food and festivities, they are in that state of mind. On the other hand, if we already talk about the holidays, in the Ashkenazi community, Yizkor, that the mentioning of the people who passed away is done only on the holidays, whereas in the Sephardic communities, it is done every Shabbat. And when people who get an aliyah, go up to the Sefer Torah, and their dear ones are mentioned. In some places, all people who died within the year are mentioned every Shabbat, and so also during the week. So you don't have this moment of people gathering all together to mention names, and could be that this is also an influence of the Kabbalah that demanded that the memorial services will be conducted only within the year or within the week of the Yortzeit, of the anniversary, and not in other times. Because according to the Kabbalists, it startles the soul of the deceased when he is being summoned, she or he is being summoned at the wrong time. So in the Sephardic world, the insistence is on, you say the memorial service within the week or within the Shloshim, within the year, that's it. After that, you pick up from a week before, but you don't mention the name of a person who passed away, not within one of those times. Whereas in the Ashkenazi world, it is done during the holidays. In my synagogue, we do both, because we accommodate people, Sephardim, Ashkenazim, and all. So on Shemini Atzeret and on Sukkot, whenever it is customary, we have these core services after the tefillah, not in the middle. So those who need to go can go. In Birkat Kohanim also, it's sort of like it's a Saba practice, which is interesting. The Kohanim usually take off their shoes right before going up to say the Birkat Kohanim, or it's called Duchanin in the Ashkenazi tradition. So before doing Birkat Kohanim, they take off their shoes. But in the last 100 something years, a practice has evolved among some Sephardic communities, starting in Egypt, then spreading to Syria, that the Kohanim do not remove their shoes. And there are still debates going on about it. In Brooklyn, where you have an Orthodox community with many Kohanim. I mean, in my synagogue in Brooklyn, I had a moment where we had 40 Kohanim saying Birkat Kohanim and another 50 congregants receiving it. So like half the synagogue was Kohanim. In Brooklyn, the more Orthodox people were pushing for taking shoes off, and other people said, no, we don't want to take our shoes off. So they ended up with some kind of a compromise where if you take your shoes off, you're allowed to go up to the platform in front of the teva, and if not, you stay at floor level. But rabbis who discussed it, among them Rabbi Toledano, that I hope will get to this teshuvah, said that it makes sense not to remove your shoes. They say that in the past, when the Halakha spoke of removing shoes before doing Birkat Kohanim, and that shows us also the ability to modernize Halakha, they said the following: in the temple, everybody was barefoot, because that was the practice back then. People were barefoot inside the temple and outside the temple. The only difference was that before entering the temple, they would wash their feet. And later on, in Mishnaic times, that people start wearing sandals, they were told to remove sandals before entering the temple area. Now, when they started doing Birkat Kohanim, the shoes of the time were very practical. The roads, meaning people who wore shoes wore it because the roads were muddy, were dangerous, and to come into the synagogue with shoes was already an allowance. Meaning you brought a lot of mud into the synagogue when you came out from the street. So to go up to the teva and say Birkat Kohanim with the shoes was inappropriate. And by the way, there were Sephardic synagogues where people used to remove their shoes before coming in. They would still do that. So I mean that in a more ancient period. So Rabbi Toledano argues that the reason for the minhag of the Kohanim to keep their shoes on is that in today's environment, it is more respectful to go up with the shoes. You have nice shoes, elegant shoes, and they're clean. The streets are clean. You clean your shoes before you come to the synagogue. It is much more respectful than standing there with your socks. So they have rabbis in defense of that. Now, what do you do when you do Birkat Kohanim? There was a tradition to cover your eyes, because there was a belief that that you're not supposed to look at the divine providence hovering over the Kohanim. And slowly the practice evolved among the Sephardim that the parents gather all their children under the talit during Birkat Kohanim, and they're all like under this the wing of the divine providence. It's a beautiful minhag. So following the Kriyat Torah, following the Amidah on Shabbat, we take out the Sefer Torah. Taking out the Sefer Torah, both on a regular day, on Shabbat, has several differences between the Sephardim and the Ashkenazim. First and foremost, it has to do with the way the Sefer Torah is kept, the shape of the Sephardic Sefer Torah and the Ashkenazi Sefer Torah. So, in this case, it's the Ashkenazi Sefer Torah that is probably more faithful to the original Sefer Torah as it used to be at the time of the temple, and that is just plain scroll over two wooden poles. This is how it was at the time of the temple, at the time of the Mishnah. The Mishnah speaks about what is called mitpahot asfarim, the scarves. So we know that they had a scroll that was wrapped with scarves, with pieces of fabric. With the split between the Ashkenazi and the Sephardic world, that, and I think that is hard. I can see where the Sephardic case came from. The Ashkenazi Sefer Torah just preserved the traditional, did not change the traditional minhag, but just added the special cover, the sort of a sleeve that comes over the Sefer Torah with two holes for the poles. There was a practice in Ashkenaz, in Germany specifically, to wrap the baby with special fabric before the Brit Milah, and after the Brit Milah to re-stitch and make from those pieces of fabric a belt for the Sefer Torah. Today you have a belt with a clamp, right? With a clamp. Back then it was just a long sash that you would wrap around the cloth, around the Sefer Torah, and it was dedicated in honor of these newborn babies, which I think is beautiful. It shows the affection towards the Sefer Torah, and because of the that structure of the Sefer Torah in the Ashkenazi world, you have when you honor people, there are two people who have the honor of Magbiha v'Agolel, right? Ya'amoda Magbiha v'Agolel. There is one person who has to raise the Sefer Torah up and turn around and show it to the congregation, and then he sits down, and while that person is sitting down, someone else comes and rolls the Sefer Torah, because you cannot hold it and roll it at the same time when it's vertical. And then in some places the honor of putting the belt around the Sefer Torah is given to a child. So you have three people: the one who raises the Sefer Torah, the one who tightens the scrolls, and the one who puts the belt around it and the sleeve to cover it. And then in the classic or traditional Ashkenazi synagogues, the person who holds the Sefer Torah sits there until they finish reading the Haftarah and the prayers leading to Musaf, and then Musaf. And in the more modern synagogues, there is a special device upon which you could lean the Torah to sit there. The reason that the traditional synagogues didn't do that, because they felt that to put the Torah maybe separately on a chair, leaning back, is not respectful enough. To each his own. I think that both are respectful in their way. In the Sephardic tradition, it's different. The Sefer Torah, the Sephardic Sefer Torah, I'm sure you've all seen, right? Sephardic Sefer Torah. Ian, have you ever seen Sephardic? Yes? No? Okay. You could see here some. One second, I'm not sure if you see it. You can see here images of Sephardic Sefer Torah. You will see there are different. These are all what you see are more modern designs, but they're basically following the classic design of here. This is an Iraqi. There's an Iraqi Sefer Torah. Could have been this one is from India. It's possible. You see the shape is like a little bit like Arabesque, a mosque maybe. That could be an influence. It is there is silver peregrine from the outside. Very common also to see velvet. You see here we have this picture of Ashkenazi Sefer Torah and a Sephardic Sefer Torah. This is definitely heavier. This one is heavier because it's the added weight of the case and of the wood, and some people do it from heavy silver. This wooden Sefer Torah is also a modern rendition of the this classic Sefer Torah that no, it's the same one, but there were Sfarim like that in North Africa, especially in Tunisia and Algeria. The Sefer Torah was octagonal and made from elaborate woodwork, all reflecting the art of the places where they lived. Now, when the Sephardim take Sefer Torah out of the ark, there are several customs. In some places, Sefer Torah is carried out open, because you can open it, and in the case, and it's being taken around the synagogue up until the Teva, while open. Other places, the Sefer Torah is closed, and we take it to the Teva, and then you open it. But the main difference there between the Sephardim and Ashkenazim is that the Hagbaha, the raising of the Torah, to show it to the community, in the Sephardic community, is done before the reading of the Torah, and in the Ashkenazi community is done after the reading of the Torah. It's hard to tell what is the reason for that. I say jokingly that Sephardim traditionally had more faith in what's written in the Torah. So the moment they show them the Sefer Torah, they say, "This is the Torah. Zot the Torah shesam Moshe lifnei B'Yisrael." We believe that this is the Torah that God gave us. And in the Ashkenazi communities, maybe where they were more skeptical, so they said, "No, first read. We want to see that that's the thing," and then they would say, "Zot the Torah shesam Moshe." It's hard to tell how this has evolved. Sometimes in the Sephardic synagogue, again because of the special design of Sefer Torah, we have the rimonim that could be taken off and on, and this honor is given to the children to put the rimonim on. In my synagogue, we started the practice of giving as many rimonim, the decoration of the Sefer Torah, to all the kids who want it. So when we take the Sefer Torah out of the ark, there's a parade. There's a whole parade of the Sefer Torah, the Haftarot, Sefer Haftarot, and sometimes 10 to 12 children carrying the rimon like the Statue of Liberty. They're very excited. That's how we get them engaged. The Torah reading. Now, Torah reading, there are many, many different practices, and it's hard to mention all of them. I'll mention just maybe the most salient one and how they differ between the Sephardic and the Ashkenazi custom. So one is that the Ashkenazim call the Ole by name, Ya'amod, Avrom, David, Ben Yitzhak, Yaakov, or whatever, you say the full name. The Sephardim don't say that. They say Shlishi Ha'ole Lichvod Torah Ya'amod Bechavod. May the first or second or third Ole come up. It might be rooted in halachic problems because the halakha discusses the situation of what do you do when you call someone by name and then you find out that that person is not there or he is not available, he's in the middle of the Amidah or something. The fear is that if that person doesn't go up to the Sefer Torah, people will think that either he disrespects the Torah and is not interested in it, or that maybe he is not eligible because his family is not Jewish or something like that. So in the Sephardic world, they avoided that by not calling a person by name and just saying let the third one get up, let the second, etc. In the Ashkenazi world, you call people by name. In the Sephardic world also, I think both Sephardim and Ashkenazim do Misha Berach, but it's different. Different language. Each one has its source. The responsibility of reading, that's where we find a difference between Sephardim and Ashkenazim. The original practice of reading the Torah, as was established by the rabbis in the time of the Mishnah and the Talmud, was that each person reads his own portion. Everyone who is called to the Torah reads his own portion. But what happened was that there were some people who couldn't read that. They were not knowledgeable, couldn't read the Torah. So a new position was created, that of the cantor or Shaliach Tzibur, that would represent the Ole by doing his reading. And from that, we have now at least 3 different practices. The Ashkenazi practice is, in the traditional synagogues, that even if the person who's being called up, even if the Ole wants to read his portion, he's not given permission, because that will be embarrassing to other people who cannot do as he does. Even though, although in modern times, a lot of Ashkenazi synagogues of different denominations, and modern Orthodox included, solve this problem by preparing people in advance. Meaning, if someone comes up and just gets an aliyah, and he comes up and he says sort of extemporaneously, I want to read, the cantor will say, no, you can't. But if the rabbi or the cantor contacted that person in advance and said, we want you to read this portion on that Shabbat, that would be okay. In the Sephardic communities, the idea is basically the cantor always knows that he's just a representative, and therefore whenever, for example, I do that, I read the Torah, and whenever someone comes up that I know is capable of reading, I offer him, would you like to read? And he might say yes, might say no. And of course, if he asks for it, I would say no problem. That's the Sephardic tradition. Yemenite tradition remained with the Mishnaic practice, which is that every Ole needs to know his own Aliyah. You go up, you have to read. It's a little more, it's a little easier than the Ashkenazi and the Sephardic tradition, because in the Yemenite tradition, there's no trop the way we know it, but rather there are three groups: Meshartim, Kesarim, Mafsikim, servants, emperors, and breaks. So you could read the whole Torah with just three different notes, but still you need to know the pronunciation, and especially in the Yemenite communities, people are out there to get you. If you make a mistake, the pronunciation is meticulous, and you have to pronounce it right. There's also especially for modern day Yemenites, the spoken Hebrew and the read Hebrew are completely different. We spoke about the Sephardic pronunciation. The Yemenite is more difficult because they don't read the vowels as we read them. So instead of, for example, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim v'et haaretz, or let's take Shema Israel, it's a known text, right? The way it will be read in the Yemenite pronunciation will be Shama Yisrael Adenoi Alehenu Adenoi Ahod Wahayu Wa'ahabto At Adenoi Alahecho Bachol Levabacho Ubachol Nafshacho Ubachol Ma'adecho. It's like, right, sounds completely different language. So it's difficult for the reader to, if he's not well trained, to read in the proper manner. That is, by the way, it's also part of our discussion of Sephardic Halakha when we discuss the issue of Aliyah for women. Can women receive or not receive an Aliyah? La Torah. The Talmud says very clearly, Hakol olin leminyan shiv'a, va'afilu isha afilu katan. Even a woman, even a minor, yes, it's written in the language of even, but because people would have thought that maybe women cannot get an aliyah, maybe a minor cannot get an aliyah. The second part, that of a minor, is again divided at least into three-way dispute. In the Ashkenazi communities, as far as I know, a minor does not get an aliyah, meaning one of the 7 mandatory aliyot of Shabbat. In the Sephardic communities, some allow a minor to have an aliyah and some don't. But the other issue, that of a woman getting an aliyah, traditionally was not practiced. But for what reason? It's important to know. The Talmud says, Isha lo tikra b'Torah mipnei kvod hatzibur, because of the dignity of the community. Now, there were those who wanted to say that means that a woman cannot sing in front of the congregation, or what people call kol isha. But that cannot be, because the Talmud has a different term for that. The Talmud would have said kol ba'isha irva, or they cannot hear her singing, but that's not what the Talmud says. It says, Amru isha lo tikra mipnei kvod hatzibur. It is disrespectful to the community. Well, now, why would it be disrespectful for the community? Why is it disrespectful if a woman reads? It's disrespectful or embarrassing to them because each one is supposed to read his own portion. But some of the men were not able to read and would have the Hazan represent them. And here comes that woman, and maybe she reads on her own. And it's tremendously embarrassing to the men. So since we are commanded by the Torah to protect the male ego, right? That's the 11th commandment. It just fell off the, when Moshe was coming down. So for that reason, women were blocked out of the synagogue, that they cannot have an aliyah. But the conclusion would be that in modern times, that, or at least in synagogues, and we don't say that it has to be everywhere, but at least in congregation where the men say, we fully embrace that and we accept that, and we're not, we don't feel inferior when a woman reads the Torah, then a woman should be able to read the Torah. And indeed, as I mentioned last time, the wife of Sleman Sassoon, Farha Sassoon, when she traveled from India back to Iraq in the 1900s, was honored with an aliyah in at least 2 communities along the way. So that is an aside discussion related to the Torah reading. What other important customs that are important that one needs to know? In the Ashkenazi communities, in the Misha Berach, in the blessing after the aliyah, the nusach is the text says, Yevarech et, Hashem will bless this and that, ba'avur she'ala Torah, in honor of his aliyah to the Torah. And maybe there's an allusion to giving a donation to the synagogue. In the Sephardic communities, many of them, there was a practice to say Misha Berach, and then say that God will bless that person, Shemit Nadev, who donates, and a blank, meaning, okay, you have to fill in the gap. How much do you give? And of course, the person has a choice to say Kematnat Yado, as much as he wants, but some people are put on the spot. And that is a problem. In some Sephardic synagogue, it is a problem. It's not... in the synagogues where I went, I tried to eliminate it. I don't think that it is appropriate to put people on the spot. And also, not to think that, people are sort of captives of war. Once they're in the synagogue, try to get money from them. Conduct the services, give them the honor that they deserve, and those who want to give will give. But that's something that you might see in certain synagogues, and you have to be prepared for that. In those synagogues where I had to do it because the board demanded that I would tell everyone Shumin Nadev, and I knew that the guest is either Ashkenazi or comes from a congregation where they don't do that. I would say the Hebrew Nusa, and I would conclude with Shehu Mitnadev, but would not pause for him to fill in a donation, but say Kematanat Yado, that he gives as much as he wants. And a person would like look at me, what is that? I says, don't worry, all is fine. You got the blessing. Just, that's okay. But those are things that border between the ritual of the synagogue and the administration, and that is a problem. To that, we have a related problem in many Sephardic synagogues, and that is the problem of auctioning the mitzvot, meaning that the mitzvot are being offered for sale. Now, when there were times where synagogues were smaller, everybody knew everyone, and they all wanted to support the cause, and the auction was sort of like a friendly competition between the members of the synagogue, and sometimes that person, Avraham would buy something for Yitzhak, and Yitzhak would buy something in return for Avraham, and they would go and kiss each other and hug each other, thank you so much, etc. But now, with modern technology and mobilization, things have changed. You have a lot of people in one synagogue that not necessarily are related to each other, and don't always feel that they want to announce how much money they want to give for a specific thing. So There are synagogues who try to work to eliminate that, to reach out to people before the holidays and see what is it that they want to have. I also try to mitigate that image of the imposed fundraising that is conducted on the high holidays by always telling people that there's no magic in them in those donations, because I myself would be put on the spot. The gabbai or the auctioneer would come up and would say, okay, we are now offering this mitzvah, for example, of opening the ark. And then he would go on to say, and if you buy this mitzvah, if you pay, let's say, $1,000 or $200,000 or $300,000 for this, you will become very wealthy. God will bless you. And then the gabbai, after making that statement, would turn to me and say, Rabbi, please explain to them how it works. Right? So now I have to deliver on that kind of indulgence. So I said it this year as well. I said this: you're not buying the mitzvah, and there's no direct guarantee that for buying this mitzvah or this honor, one will be blessed. But rather, the idea is that the synagogue as a community offers a lot of things to the people: learning possibilities, community, feeling in context, support system, and so on. Talmud Torah, kids, all these things are things that we want to support. By making a donation, you show that you want to support these activities. And in return, the administration of synagogue is honoring you with opening the ark or carrying the Torah. I think it's better. I hope to go on to the stage where this is eliminated completely. I also hope that none of my board members, the current one, will listen to this class, because it's out of the record. But that is what I think should be done in the synagogue. And when I was mentioning the auctioning, I touched probably on a very, very big difference between the Sephardic and the Ashkenazi communities, and that is the question of the interaction between people in the synagogue, which in the Sephardic synagogue is very encouraged. People, this is part of the culture. When you enter, how you greet people, when you receive an aliyah, how you are greeted by the people, etc. But we'll discuss that in the next session. So let's take a break now, and in our second session we'll discuss the social interaction of the synagogue, kissing, hugging, candies, etc.